Rostermania for the VCT offseason has begun, and while there are still many unanswered questions about where certain players are going to go, we do know more today than we did a few weeks ago about which players are switching teams and aren't returning to their previous ones. So today we're going to be looking at a bunch of different players that have had news on them. Some of these are just rumors, some of these are reported by esports journalists, some are confirmed, some are not confirmed. So we're here to talk about all of that today. So this is the board we have today. Now this is all of the main news that I could find. A few weeks ago, I did a video covering every single VCT free agent this offseason, as well as news about other players that are restricted free agents or are rumored to be leaving their current teams. So what's on the board today is now players that have had updated situations. We now know a bit more of what's happening with them, as well as just news in general about these players. So we're going to be starting with the resigned category. So these are, of course, players as well as a coach who are staying on the teams they were on last year. Starting with two people from Fnatic, we have Boaster and Milan being their head coach, taking over for the team in February after kickoff, which ended up being the right move. Milan ended up being a very good coach for this team, and they weren't getting the results that they wanted with Putty, so he proved himself by helping this team go to back-to-back grand finals, as well as an Esports World Cup grand final. So we'll see if next year he can finally win a trophy as a head coach. And Boaster staying makes a lot of sense for Fnatic. This is probably his last year, at least that's what I would assume. He is getting older in terms of esports age, and I feel like he kind of just wants that champs trophy and then he's able to dip. I think if Fnatic had won champions, he's probably retired. Moving on, staying in EMEA, we have three players from Giant X. All three of Grabino, Aura, and Flickless have re-signed with the team. Makes a lot of sense. That team went on a very good run at the end of the year and made playoffs at champs. So with some more development and time together, then maybe this team can end up being something really special. And to top off the re-signed category, Bane was announced to be staying with DRX. Yet another move that does make a lot of sense. While he was kind of in and out of the lineup this year, he ended up being on the roster for champions and I think proved himself to be a permanent member of that roster. So I'm glad that DRX has at least looked like they're not going to make too many changes to that roster because they are bringing back Bane. I think is the right move. Now, of course, these are only 5 players and a coach that have re-signed. At least this is stuff that is confirmed or mostly confirmed. Of course, more players will be re-signing with their teams. I would expect the G2 players to re-sign with their team. Everybody except Giacomo, as well as the coach Josh RT, have their contract up, but I would expect them to stay, and it's been pretty quiet around those players, so that tells me that they're probably just staying in their same situation. Of course, anything can change, but there is going to be a lot of players re-signing, but we do know some players that are moving on from their previous situations. So starting with the free agent category, we already knew Mindfreak was going to be departing from PaperX, but this has now been officially confirmed by the team with a recent tweet. Again, we already knew this was coming. Mindfreak is definitely one of the top free agents in the Pacific region. A very good player. I wouldn't say he was the problem on PaperX, but Patman ended up being the solution. So he just kind of ended up being the odd man out. I am very glad that he ended up being on the team as a coach when they won Toronto, because that does mean he does count as a tournament winner, even if it's not as a player. Let's see if he can do it as a player in wherever he goes. Moving on, we have some pretty big news now. This isn't 100% these players are switching teams, but that is where it is leaning to. Now, Texture, Charon, Munchkin, and Lakia, as well as the coaches of Gen G Solo and HSK, they all have their contracts up, and it was a recent announcement that those players are free agents, and Gen G right now has not re-signed anybody. Now, of course, if you think back to last year, Munchkin was also a free agent and ended up re-signing with the team at the last minute, so they ended up basically keeping everybody except for Meteor in Gen G, but this time it just kind of feels different, especially with the announcement. Now, it was leaked before the official announcement that it looked like Texture and Solo were going to be leaving the team, finding new situations elsewhere. We don't know where they're going, but it does seem like nobody is returning to Gen G aside from the players that they have under contract, which is Foxy9 as well as I think Ash. So this team is going to be completely different next year. Texture, I would think, is now the top free agent available in the Pacific region, an incredibly talented duelist player who I don't think was the problem for Gen G at all. They were still a good team in 2025, they just ended up falling short, and I think the main reason was they were missing Meteor. Missing Meteor, who is very good in the clutch, he's very good in those big situations, he proved that at Bangkok. He was a huge rock for this team, and they were missing that this year, so even if Texture went on an amazing run like he did in Toronto, if that ever wavered, then they didn't really have somebody else that could really step up aside from maybe Caron, who is also a free agent who is also going to be incredibly sought after. He had one of the best rookie years we've seen in the VCT in 2024, literally just going from ranked to a tier 1 spot and not looking out of place at all. Munchkin is an IGL who's been around for a little bit. It's looking like he's probably going to retire. I do believe he has to do military service, so that's probably what's going to end up happening. Maybe he'll just take a year off and then come back, but we'll see what happens with them. It's very hard to do that, but maybe we'll see Munchkin in a VCT jersey again at some point. Lakia, no idea what's going to happen there. He didn't play for the entire year. He did re-sign with the team pretty late into stage 2 and ended up just not playing at all. So really don't know what's going to happen there, but I can't imagine he's going to be super sought after. But Texture and Caron are absolutely amazing free agents that are going to get a lot of offers. And we'll see what happens with the coaching staff. Solo and HSK, the coaching staff of Gen G, I think are very good coaches. Of course, struggling without Meteor. Again, I think basically the main problem with Gen G was just they didn't have Meteor. So we'll see if this coaching staff ends up getting picked up by another team. There only is so many Korean teams. However, there is a Korean team that is going to be looking for an entirely new coaching staff, and that is T1. Which brings me to T1, a team that is going through a lot of change this offseason. We don't have any roster announcements aside from the fact that Sylvan has now officially been let go by the team. We of course already knew he wasn't on the roster, but now it's official. He's not on the organization at all. We'll see if he ends up getting any offers. I think the whole T1 documentary situation is actually going to entice a few different teams to at least look at him, but we'll see where that goes. What is interesting is that the entire coaching staff of T1 is gone. Adam, their head coach, Indigo, their assistant coach, as well as Cheongak are now out of the organization. Now, it was in the Sheep Esports report that Cheongak was, I hope I'm saying that right, was also being let go by the team, but he's still on the VLR page, and there hasn't been an official announcement about him, but there's been official announcements about Autumn and Indigo, so don't really know what's happening there, but I was going off of the Sheep Esports report. But of course, Autumn and Indigo have officially not been re-signed by T1. So that is very interesting, and I do kind of agree with it overall. While T1 did win a tournament at VCT Masters Bangkok, a lot of the year was falling short of expectations, especially not making it to Toronto or doing very well at Champions. And while they do have a star-studded roster, it does kind of feel like there was a lot of kind of personality issues going on there. And part of that does come from the coaching staff and trickles down. So while Autumn has proved himself as a coach, was he the right fit for this team? Evidently not, at least not after Bangkok. So we'll see if he gets a job as well as Indigo. Very curious to see the direction that T1's going in. But again, if you want a Korean coach, Solo's right there. Moving on, we have a player and a coach from 100 Thieves. Now, if you haven't noticed, the little C in brackets means coach, so didn't point that out before, but I am now. But anyways, Kess and Zeeks were already known to be moving on from 100 Thieves. While they were both still under contract, it looked like 100 Thieves are doing an entire rebuild, and they opted to not bring the coach back as well as the newest player of the roster in Kess. So it looks like a lot of changes are coming to 100 Thieves. Kess, I do think, proved himself enough to maybe get a look at a tier 1 spot. Again, I think he did very well, especially at the start of stage 2. Kind of fell off a little bit by the end, but I think with a more consistent team and a little more time, he could probably be a pretty good player. Zeeks, I do think, ended up being a pretty good coach for 100 Thieves overall, but I think there were some problems about the read on the meta, as well as a bunch of other things and how the team was built overall and the decisions that were made at different parts of the year. But now they're going to be getting a new coach. We'll see how they do. All right, so those are all the official free agents that have been recently announced or updated. It's now time to move on to some players that we know, or at least kind of know, are going to be on new teams. First one is Sarak. Now, he is apparently going to Crew to be this team's new IGL and to build the roster around him and Dante Deus. And this makes a lot of sense. Crew were trying to get Sadak last year as well. That ended up not happening, and then they settled on Adverso as their IGL until he was eventually kicked off the roster. The IGL position for Crew has been very much in flux for the last few years, and I do think that's been one of their main issues, not their only issue, but they don't really have a set in-game leader for very long. So you bring in Sadak, who has a lot of experience. Yes, people question the comps that he's doing and the ideas that he has, but when it's effective, he can be a very good IGL. So I do think he's a pretty good fit for Crew. Seems like that's what's going to happen, and I think it should be a good move, but we'll see how it works and how much longevity Sadak has as a VCT player. Moving on, we have Calm apparently making his way back to Evil Geniuses, a move that I do think makes a lot of sense. After the Calm experiment on Leviathan didn't end up working out the way that he wanted it to, going back to Evil Geniuses, going back to be playing under Potter, I think is a fantastic move. He shined under that coach. The coach knows him very well. The coach knows how he plays. So we'll see if Calm is the only one of that 2023 roster that Evil Geniuses end up picking up. But there are a few of them that are available in free agency. I don't think that they would be able to rebuild that team entirely, but I do think you could probably get Calm. Demon 1 is available. I think that is an option that could happen. Boostio is also a free agent. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's fun to think about, especially with Calm apparently returning to that team. Moving on, we have DOS9, previously of Boom Esports, left the roster in a pretty surprising way before Ascension started. The reasons of that move not being totally clear, but now it is, because apparently he's moving on to Carmine Corp. A pretty interesting move overall. DOS9 was one of Boom's best players this year. Boom, of course, falling short and needing to fight for their Ascension slot in Pacific Ascension right now, and DOS9 not being there definitely doesn't help, because he was very good for them, and we'll see how he does in EMEA. He will be that team's import player. Seems like Carmine Corp really like to have import players. Moving on, we have two players joining Gentlemates who recently re-secured their VCT spot. Of course, Koi being kicked out of the VCT made way for that spot to be available, and Gentlemates ended up being approved by Riot to stay in the VCT. And apparently they are looking at Martin and a tier 2 player by the name of Bipo. Sorry if I'm not saying that right, but he is an Italian player who was playing on mouse in tier 2 this year. So now he's moving on to Gentlemates, so we'll see how that ends up working. And the whole taking players from tier 2 thing is going to be happening a lot more, but because Ascension is going on right now, aside from China that is now finished, we aren't going to know a lot of players that are joining the VCT tier 1 system until Ascension is over. All the tier 1 teams are going to be looking at tier 2. Clearly it works to look at talent from that section of the VCT, bring those players up, develop them, hope they hit. Some of course working a lot more than others, but since Ascension is going on and that's where all the best tier 2 players are, it makes sense that we don't know how a lot of the rosters are shaking out right now, but we do know some players that are maybe switching things around. And that moves us on to the rumor section of this video. Now these are players that aren't totally confirmed to be in their new spots, but they have rumors surrounding them. So we're starting with two players that are apparently going to Furia. Artson has been listed as a potential pickup for Furia, same with Koala Noob. So it looks like Furia might be moving to a more international roster, probably English speaking, and Artson maybe as the IGL. Artson has also been linked to Loud, which I think would be a much better fit for him personally, but it's going to come down to a lot of different factors and what Furia is willing to offer to both of these players. Koala Noob is a player who was on M80 and played in tier 2 for a long time, but of course fell short in the Ascension Grand Final 2 times in a row. Then of course he played on Na'Vi last year, didn't last on that roster, he got kicked off of it midway through the season, so now he's looking at another potential tier 1 spot, this time in the Americas, which should be a better fit for him, so we'll see how that ends up going. Artson definitely not returning to MIBR at this point, but he's still a solid player who has a lot to offer, and I think that he could be a good pickup for any team if put in the right position. Moving on, we have Silence, formerly of 2Game, apparently going to Crew. Now this looks like it's mostly confirmed, but there's been some conflicting reporting on who Crew's looking at, so I opted to put him in the rumor section versus the new team section. But honestly, I think Silence would be a pretty good pickup for Crew. He didn't have the best season in tier 1 last year, but now he has more experience under his belt. Playing with players like Sadik and Dante Deus, I think could do wonders for his career. He was one of the better players for 2Game during their tier 2 run, so I do think that Silence would be a good player to at least look at for a tier 1 spot. Playing with better players, playing under a better system, could do wonders for him. Next up, we have Cortezia. Now, he is a restricted free agent. He is still under contract with MIBR, but you see that his name's in red, and that's because he's apparently been seen trialing with Sentinels. Sentinels, of course, shaking up their roster after a disappointing 2025. They, of course, have another player whose contract is up, but we'll get to him later. But Cortezia is a restricted free agent, doesn't look like MIBR is bringing him back, which I do think is a huge mistake. I thought he was great for them. He's a great energy guy. He can play really well. He has great aim. Don't know what MIBR is doing letting him go. But if he ends up going to Sentinels, if they put him in the right position, then he could be a very good addition. I do wonder what role he would end up playing, because if you bring back John QT, who is still not confirmed to be either staying or leaving Sentinels, and there hasn't been a lot of rumors around him either, both him and Cortezia play this Sentinel role primarily, so one of them would have to switch if they're both on the same roster. I don't know if this is the best fit for Cortezia if he ends up going to Sentinels, but he is a very talented player, so it definitely could be a good move. But it does look like he's going to find himself on another tier 1 team, and I think he proved enough in 2025 for that to be viable. So we'll see how things end up shaking up for Cortezia and the rest of Sentinels. Moving on, we have Ospas. Now, the main rumor with Ospas is that he's leaning towards staying with MIBR. He's been offered a huge contract by Chinese teams as well. JDG is one of those teams that has been rumored with a contract offer apparently over 1 million with a 6-figure salary monthly, which would make a lot of sense for Ospas. I think he has done enough to earn that big of a paycheck, but apparently he is prioritizing staying with MIBR. He, of course, has not signed anything yet, at least to the public's knowledge, so we don't know if for sure this is going to happen or not, but I do think he probably ends up staying. But hey, getting an amazing offer from a Chinese team, that could definitely entice some people to move on to that kind of situation. But of course, you don't want to end up like Ye and Bleed in 2024, and Ospas definitely cares about winning. I would probably guess he cares about winning more than he cares about money. But of course, esports careers are only so long, so you might as well make as much money as you can. But we'll see where Ospas ends up going. I'm betting he's staying in MIBR. That would be my guess. Moving on, we have Som. Now, the word right now is he is not returning to Energy. He is probably retiring from competitive play altogether. And this makes a lot of sense. I do think this is probably the right move for Som in his overall life and his career. He, of course, has played professional Valorant for a long time now. He did take a break in 2024, but then came back to the roster. But now he has a chance to end on a high note. He just won Champions, and he's still pretty young. He, of course, is a very big content creator as well. He didn't need to return to competitive play at all. He has a very healthy stream, huge online presence, huge audience. He didn't need to play pro at all, but he did it for the love of the game, and now he's won champs. So I think why not go out on a high note, which of course would leave Energy to be looking for a new controller player, which moves us on to our last player we have to talk about, Zekken. Now, with the rumors that Energy is looking for a new controller player, Zekken's name has popped up. And this is something that I'm gonna say I don't think this should happen. While Zekken would be an amazing addition to any team, I think putting him on the controller role would be a mistake. Now, you could, of course, play double duelist comps. You have Zekken and Mata as double duelists. That would be an amazing combination. But my question would definitely be, how long is double duelist going to be viable for? Of course, the meta changes very drastically. Plus, you do need that main controller player that Som was for this team. So if that ends up being Zekken and he ends up switching to that controller role, could he do a good job of it? Yes, I do believe so. But is that the right position to put him in? I would argue no. Zekken is a very good player who has played other roles aside from duelist, dating back to his days on Xset. When he was originally picked up by Sentinels, he was picked up to be their initiator player. But ever since he switched to the duelist role primarily, he hit a new gear. He became one of the best duelists in the world, one of the best duelists in the game, winning Madrid off of that. So I don't see why any team would look at him and not want him to be the main duelist player. Unless he's done playing that role and wants to move on to something else, I don't see how that's that viable of an option. So we'll see what ends up happening with Zekken. With him and John QT, it's really up in the air right now. There hasn't been a lot of rumors one way or the other about either of these players. What we do know is that a lot of teams are looking at Zekken, and I would bet that a lot of teams are looking at John QT as well. So honestly, if I were a betting man, it's kind of looking like Zekken's not returning to this roster, which honestly would be a shame, but that's just kind of the vibe I'm getting right now. We'll see if I end up being wrong, but Sentinels, they do need some changes in switching out your player who now has a contract up. That would be the easiest move to make. Would it be the right move? Maybe not, but it would be the easiest one. So we'll see what ends up happening there, as well as with the rest of the players that are on the board. Are the players that are getting re-signed making the right decision, as well as the teams? Are the free agents available going to go to a bunch of new teams, or are we going to be surprised and they're going to re-sign? Probably not re-sign. Are the players on their new teams going to be the right choices for these organizations? And is the rumor mill going to be correct in what we've been hearing? Let me know all that and more in the comment section down below. Please click like and subscribe if you enjoy this video. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you guys next one. Bye.